Hello and welcome to another session of Great Shouts Marketing and Growth Interviews. I'm Ed Davidson, I'm a fractional head of marketing and your host for all these sessions. And this series, we've moved to interviewing marketing experts and business owners. And the topic is all around how marketing and growth evolves when you move from a startup into a scale-up phase. And we hope these sessions are really useful for CEOs or startup founders that are moving from that startup to scale up phase by people in the know. And this session, we've got the pleasure of Alex Hunter. So Alex cut his teeth at Virgin. He launched Virgin America, especially at the kind of early stage, and he rose up to head of online at the Virgin Group. He's an investor and advisor across a number of startups as well. And he's the host of the award-winning online travel show, Attaché. I've got personal love of the Oxford version of that or the session because I was there and it was tied to a friend of mine, Andrew. And to top it all off, he's a keynote speaker as well and appearing on kind of the major events like AdTech, but also private events for companies as well, including VW and Pepsi. So Alex, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Great stuff. Okay, so first question I normally ask, just to kind of baseline where your thinking is. How do you define when a startup starts moving to a scale-up phase?
I think that there is a moment of panic, a palpable moment of panic among the founders. And this happens, I don't think there's a point on a timeline where you can say it'll happen, 18 to 24 months in. I think it could be years, it could be, much shorter than that. But and I've seen it with a lot of my clients, a palpable sense of I've forgotten why we started this business. And I think for me, coming in as a brand consultant, I know that they've reached a point, and I'm making it sound negative or frightening, but it's not, where if you went around the business and you asked 10 people, what does this company do? Tell me in 7 words, you would get 10 different answers. And I think that if that's not identified, understood, and mitigated quickly, it tends to metastasize into something that borders on apathy. No one is clear on what happens. The direction becomes very unclear. And I don't think you can build something truly compelling in when you have that. So for me, that's the point where I think, okay, well, you've hit this inflection point of scale up, and that's a good thing. Well done. It's not easy to break that gravitational pull of the startup. But there does come that risk of we've grown quickly. Have we retained our sense of identity and who we are and what we do and why we've built this in the first place? From my perspective, I'm not a numbers guy. Numbers are scary and frightening. So I don't look at it as like, well, when you've reached this EBITDA, then you've gone from startup to scale up. I think it's much more of an environmental thing, a cultural thing that points to uh, this scale up inflection point that is, both good and bad.
And I suppose it is interesting at those kind of early phases. There's often a number of pivots. There's often new kind of individuals coming into different roles with different opinions. Is
Absolutely.
that, as you coming into that brand consultant, do you often kind of see that you need a bit of a reset before they can start to scale with a unified message?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, yeah. And I think that we had that at Virgin America. Uh, I joined Virgin America when it was a dozen or so people. It was just an idea. There was no airplanes, no money, no license to fly. It was just an opportunity that, we could make the US domestic airline market better than it already was, which was as good as slamming your hand in a car door over and over again. It was not a great experience. The people that were brought in were builders. They were far more on the creative side. They were building something that would need to scale elegantly in the future, but also be markedly different. And you can't do that by hiring people that have done the same thing over and over again. So come from airline, you're going to get an incremental difference. If you bring someone into an airline from Apple or W Hotels or Gap, the clothing company, you will get revolutionary change. So we built something that was going to be different, and you could see it in the hires. Like my boss was the head of marketing, the CMO, and he came from Nike. He didn't come from Delta Airlines. Uh, the guy that designed all of the entire inside of the airplane came from physical retail, from Apple. The guy that designed all of the check-in desks and the waiting areas came from Apple. You know, physical experience, manifest that type of thing. But when the airline got its license to fly and started flying, there was a wholesale changing of the guard.
Mm,
I would say 75% of leadership within 6 months changed from people who were builders to people who were scalers,
mm,
who knew how to grow an airline because the airline world is a very fickle and unique esoteric environment that requires people that understand the economics there and how one grows an airline. And you can throw in the Mavericks. You need the Mavericks, but the economics generally don't change. It's science. So you had to have that. But it was fascinating for me looking back after I had gone to the Virgin Group in London to see, wow, all of these people are leaving, and then seeing they're bringing in people who can take what we've done and scale it to something sustainable because we were building a startup. So it was hemorrhaging money, right? And these people are going to go, love what you've done, love the attitude you've built, love the culture that you've built. Now let's try and scale this into something that's not going to bleed to death in 8 months. And they did a fantastic job, but they were very different people.
can you keep the essence of that kind of startup culture while also, keeping that, I suppose, the test and learn, keeping the ethos, the dynamics of it, but still
Yeah.
scaling? Do you
Yeah,
see?
yeah, absolutely. It's not easy. It's not easy. And I think the older and bigger you are, the harder it becomes to reverse engineer that. So it's incredibly important to bake that into the genetics of the organization from day one. Part of a professional frustration of mine is to going into organizations who have failed to do this and failed, I think, more importantly, to see the value in it. And I think organizations that scale culture successfully are the ones that have defined their reason for being clearly and well from day one. So that is a 5 to 7 word articulation of why you exist,
Mm,
you know, and it's not about something like, I don't know, we exist to improve the efficiency of supply chain logistic. No, 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 no. It has to be something that every human being in the organization, irrespective of their role, can identify with and apply to their own day to day. And it needs to be hung, maybe not literally, but present every day so people can glance at it as they go about their job and go, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. And I understand it. And it's a noble and good cause. And I think once you do that, you've you've done 80% of the battle. The rest of the battle is making sure that everybody that is in your organization, and just as importantly, everybody that comes into your organization understands that reason for existence, can identify with it, and feels like it's their own. Then they're not just, bowing to some corporate mantra, but they can actually feel it and own it and be part of it. They're emotionally invested in it. Then the whole thing becomes really rather easy, frankly. Um, and there's a number of ways to do that. And Virgin America, when you came into the organization, irrespective of your role, from the CEO down, customer facing or not, you went through a full day brand immersion workshop. We called it the brand bath because it was almost like this sort of, you know, baptismal religious experience. And we gave you a Virgin America towel at the end of it. But it was a very emotional day, actually. There was a lot of tears because it was a sort of, it was very, we would ask people, what's your favorite brand? What brand do you love that gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling? And people would say, I don't know, Starbucks or Apple or Coke or whatever it was. And we would say, okay, but why? Well, because I like it. Yeah, but why? Because it tastes good. Yeah, but why? And it was like someone saying, what is your political affiliation? And you say X. And why? Because they do. But why? Why? And you're like, all right, all right, all right. eventually you understand the provenance of your affiliation and connection with that brand, and you realize you like Coke because it's what Granny always had, and it was a treat, and you miss her and all of that stuff. So it's like, okay, that's it. That's the essence. That's what we're trying to do. This is an emotional thing, not an intellectual thing. You made that choice for an emotional reason. Out of that emotion, we basically gave the keys to the kingdom, the brand, to the people who would be delivering on that brand every day. It was not something that stayed in the ivory towers. It was something that we gave to the people that were going to be delivering the Virgin America customer experience every single day. So they felt like they had an emotional connection with the mission of the brand. Sometimes people think, oh, that's just fuzzy nonsense, but it's really not. It's an absolutely necessary thing to do. Otherwise, you just get inconsistency.
And I suppose it just needs to ring true for people. And like, noted here, noble and good cause.
Yeah.
It's got to be an element that is instilled and lived and breathed by everyone, but it also needs to be believed in. Otherwise, if it doesn't ring true, then it feels a bit empty.
100%.
And obviously, if you're talking about Coke, you're talking about Virgin, there is that emotive state to it. Do you think that can be achieved by the most dull or the most dire, industries or brands? And how do you think that can be instilled and how that can be drawn out?
I have been speaking to large and small businesses around the world for about 17 years. I have yet to come across a business or an industry that is immune to creating that level of emotional connection with somebody somewhere. I mean, even the most boring B2B SaaS software, like if your software means that I can get home to my kids half an hour earlier than I used to be able to, then you're God as far as I'm concerned. And it's about what is the emotional impact on the end user, the customer, whatever you want to call it. How are you making their life easier or better or more fulfilling or just less faffy, than it would be. That's really powerful. I don't think we should underestimate that. And I think it can be very easily translated into a cause or a mission or whatever you'd like to call it. I think it's just because what you do on the face of it is mind-bendingly dull, it doesn't mean that it's not making someone's life better somewhere. Otherwise, why would you be doing it?
Makes sense. And I suppose at an early stage of becoming a startup with the choice of channels, they're looking for direct response because there's a very clear spend Y, get X return.
Mhm.
Where do you think the brand fits in with that? Can you include kind of brand elements to it
Sure.
outside of the direct response where you're spending on things and very clear what returns you're getting?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that the obvious ROI on brand is on loyalty, right? If I'm not having to pay to reacquire a customer every time that should be coming back because they want to, not because I've incentivized them or paid for them to be reacquired, then that's a massive win on the bottom line. Further to that, if that loyalty then breeds advocacy, i.e., that person is going and shouting from the rooftops to their peer group, their social graph, you can't buy that level of recommendation. You can't synthesize it. It's earned, and it's something that your marketing spend cannot achieve organically. So investing in that brand, investing in that customer experience, that customer service, that service recovery element when things go wrong pays dividends. I mean, not immediately. You're not going to see dollar for dollar return, but over the lifetime of a customer, you will see, if invested wisely, that money come back in orders of magnitude in what you invested in it. I think it's very, very powerful. It's easy to dismiss brand as creative, as a strap line, as a logo, but it's so much more than that. And I think that then you start to see where these green shoots turn into mighty oaks quite quickly.
And when you going through the kind of startup to scale up phase for Virgin America there, you kind of mentioned teams a little bit earlier, but were there particular hires that were important at certain stages? And were there teams that were brought on together that complemented each other? Where did you see that kind of working with the team growth?
I think the first cadre of hires for the cabin crew was instrumental because they weren't just coming in to deliver a predefined service. They were defining that service. So they were in the trenches, like, we should build the cabin this way. We should have the lighting look like this. The food should do this because here's my experience based, on what frustrates customers, what tastes bad, what is wasted, that type of thing. So having their input and their say in things even like the design of the seat, and you're asking a flight attendant, how should we design an airplane seat? How should we board the airplane? People that had worked the check-in desks, they were given a huge platform and a frequent platform to feed into the process, which is why we designed a boarding pass that was half the size of a regular boarding pass, because they kept saying, not only are you saving half the money on the paper, but also people always end up folding them anyway, and then they can't unfold them. So just put all the information. Let's put the information that we as check-in crew and cabin crew need to see prominently. Let's redesign the whole thing, because as opposed to saying we're going to make the boarding pass like this because this is how we've always done it.
Mm.
I think most of us would have thought, let's just do it the way we've always done it because it's just a flipping boarding pass. But having that first group of hires come in and influence so much more than their actual day to day was so crucial in creating something that was so different in the space.
And how did that? I think sometimes there's customer research done, or there's, as you say, there's the people that are on the coal face, and that's so invaluable, but it gets stuck somewhere. So the feedback loops aren't
Mm-hmm.
quick enough, or they don't, or they get pushed back.
Yep.
Is there anything that you can, say in terms of that and the ways that it was drawn into that decision making, and those decisions could be made quicker?
Absolutely. I think, and this is a real issue for scale ups, especially when it's a founder-led scale up. They've brought an idea, which in many cases is their pride and joy. It's their baby, and they're very and understandably protective of it. And they don't want to relinquish control of it or influence or anything like that. And I think that's great when you're trying to preserve the purity of the startup, and you're making sure that you're focused only on a very core mission, and you're not getting pulled in a million directions. That's hard. That takes discipline, and I admire it. What I also admire is a founder who can then let it go, who can delegate to the hires that they themselves have made to take it in a direction that but they probably wouldn't have been able to either have the intelligence makes it sound unfair, but you can't be good at everything. But also the bravery to just let that go and let that person that they've hired uh, really, really run with it. As the company grows and you've got hundreds, maybe even thousands of employees, you're so right. Information tends to trickle downwards, but never back upwards. Having the processes in place to make sure that that information filters back to leadership with value and context, and it isn't just a dashboard of numbers, but there is opinion there and advice, and it's valued and cherished because it's coming from, as the coal face, as you say. I think is really important. To me, one of the companies that is exemplary at this is believe it or not, McDonald's. At a global level, not just at a regional or country level, they have the mechanisms in place to not only encourage and reward this data, but capture it and bring it to the highest echelons of power in McDonald's, who then put it in place and have made significant strategic changes based on the information. The Big Mac was created by a franchisee in the United States who was experimenting. It didn't come from the McDonald's test kitchen in Georgia. And of course, it's their signature and iconic product. And that only happened because they had the corporate culture and leadership culture in place and the processes to make sure that that discovery, that invention was given room to breathe. And if you don't do that, you're going to suffocate your scale up quite quickly.
And I suppose what's interesting as well is the staff growing out of the startup into the scale up, right?
Hmm.
And as you say, you've got a lot of individuals that have got such an inbuilt understanding of the customers, but potentially they're not at the level to scale up into a senior position. How do you deal with that, or how have you kind of experienced that with clients where you're bringing in other people, but you don't want to squash the growth and ambition of the people who started the organization?
Yeah, I think it's delicate. It's really delicate. And you know, at the end of the day, business is business, right? And I think ego is only so valuable. The if you are genuinely pulling in the direction of a common goal, I think one needs to encourage egos to be set aside, right? And that doesn't mean that you don't reward and encourage innovation and creativity and leadership and all of that type of thing. And I think it has to be when you see that exemplary behavior that you want the rest of the organization to emulate, you have to capture it and understand what made it good in the first place. Like remove it from the person almost. Like what are the attributes this person is displaying? Document it and then try and replicate it. But then give that person credit. This idea came from this person and let's hold them up in front of the company and go, wow, look at this. Isn't this a great idea? We're gonna roll this idea out system wide. How great would that feel as an employee, irrespective of your rank in of course, you know, making somebody feel good doesn't pay the mortgage. You have to balance that as well. But I think there's so many ways to do that without, hurting people's feelings. And I think that's important. You have to look after your people.
Is it, as a company grows as well, in terms of, say, KPIs or management? You mentioned dashboards and the problem with the dashboards in terms of being able to see, but obviously as a company grows, you need to be able to see
Yeah.
how each of those things are coming together. Is there any kind of recommendations that you've got in terms of KPIs or OKRs, or having individuals and teams working together and balancing in the best way? And
Yeah.
then these are nice warts and all interviews. Have you seen any disasters? You don't need to name any names, but
Oh yeah. I've seen tons of disasters where pure, and don't get me wrong, I mean, dashboards are invaluable. I'm a huge fan of them. I think they are almost a perfect blend of art and science in the way that they display mission critical information in a digestible way. Where the disasters have come from is where it is the only decision input, where you are looking at a fast moving ticker of information and you're using it to make your strategic decisions, and you're not taking in those other sources of input that we've been talking about, like your frontline staff, and the people that have kind of come before you. There's no harm in reaching out to somebody that's long left the company and going, can we grab a coffee? This is where we think the company is going, or what do you think about this specific issue? I think that that's invaluable. In terms of measuring that success, yeah, I I've been out of the corporate game as an employee or a manager for 15 years, so I don't know what the latest and greatest techniques are, but I think you have to have some sort of measurement at a team level. At an individual level, I don't know, to be honest with you. I think it is very industry specific,
Hmm.
and also very role specific. But if a team is delivering on something, how do you measure the success of that team if you're not measuring something, right? You have to have a number associated with it. What that number is, well, I think that that's for every team leader or organization to come up with themselves, and also not be married to. It's okay to say, how do you measure the quality of X when you've never done it before? Well, try a few things. Give it some
Hmm.
time to kind of really marinate properly and bed in, but be okay with going, and this isn't working. Let's try something else. And let's reach out to an industry mailing group or a subreddit or wherever it is you find your kin, your tribe, and say, what are you guys using to measure X? They're all trying to solve the same problems. I mean, are you really competitors? Probably not. You're just trying to solve the same management leadership team problems as everybody else. And I think that there's there's a rather beautiful joy in those, sharing those wins and those frustrations and those challenges. That's why we all go to these conferences, right?
Yeah. And I suppose that the tribe thing's quite interesting in terms of the early stage of a business, the tribe being the customer and targeting the customer.
Mm,
Those kind of early adopters might be very different from different cohorts of customers. You start
yeah.
scaling up and getting wider.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of recommendations that you have of keeping true to, say, the brand or the kind of messaging, but making it appropriate to a
Yeah.
wider group of audience?
It's very hard. It's very hard. And I don't think there's any shame in understanding that you're going to have very different types of customer. You're going to have, and you need to talk to them differently. They're not homogenous, nor should they be treated as homogenous. You are going to have your ultra turbo loyalists who love you and want to engage with you and want to understand you and have access to you. And they're going to be great sources of solicited and unsolicited feedback on a regular basis. You talk to them in a very specific way, and then you're going to have your customers, and maybe they're the vast majority of them, who are purely transactional. They do not want a relationship with you. They don't want to hear from you. They don't give a about you, right? They just want the product or service that you provide, and they want to be left alone. And they and talk to them far less frequently, and in a very different tone of voice. And there is a piece of work, an ongoing piece of work that identifies those cohorts, those peer groups of customer, and then there is the work that decides how and how frequently you talk to those people and how valuable they are. I mean, you could put a number on them, frankly, you really can, and I think you have to. The churn of the transactional customer, it's about, you know efficiency, monetization, cart value, that type of thing. But then it's also making sure that you remind them that you exist so that when they do need that transaction, they don't think about anybody else. That's delicate. It's extremely delicate because if you annoy them, they will go somewhere else out of spite, right? Even if they have to pay a couple of quid more. So that bit is delicate. It's optimizable. There are entire industries built on optimizing that relationship. And then there's you know, the airline world is very good at this. They've the frequent flyers, you talk to them very differently. They get different value. They are of more value to you in a different way. And you talk to them differently and more frequently because they have signaled to you that they're open to that level of relationship. And that's what it is. It's a relationship.
And I suppose what's your opinion there and kind of the loyalty of the customer and how important that loyalty is? I think there's differing opinions of it. One that if you build that loyalty and you put that emphasis into that retention of that customer, that'll pay dividends. But also there's a view of it is a market and people will fly very quickly, and there needs to be far
Yeah.
more of a focus on kind of acquisition because there's a natural churn that'll happen anyway.
I think both are right. I think both are absolutely right. I think you can overthink the weaponization of loyalty to the point where it obfuscates the actual relationship that you have with the customer. If you're trying to quantify loyalty and wrap point systems and tier systems around it, in the olden days, you were able to come up with something that the airline world is where you were stuck with an alliance or an airline because you felt you had an actual financial investment with them. You had 100,000 points, and you had accrued this status, which meant when you boarded the airplane, they punched you a little less hard than they would if you were just boarding for the first time. The airline world, well, let's call it travel world because hotels feature in this as well. The customer kind of rose up against that quite a lot, maybe 10 years ago, and said, we're not going to tolerate crap service just because we feel like we've got some made up currency invested with you. And that forced airlines and hotels to really change the way that they look at loyalty and almost create a sort of strata of loyalty, if you will, based on exactly what you're talking about. What is the value to me of a long-term customer versus the churn customer? And how much are we investing in retaining quote unquote valuable customers versus acquiring new churn customers? And that dial is calibrated without exaggeration every single day of a large loyalty-based operation. You're constantly finding the balance of that, and then it comes down into these micro factions. But we're talking about multi-billion dollar multinational organizations. So for scale up, it doesn't need to be nearly as complicated as that. You have the people that have self-identified as loyal because they've engaged with you outside of the purchase flow, like on social media. Or they've identified as a brand advocate, or they're repeat purchasers without discount or nudge or anything like that, without you engaging them or incentivizing them. And then there's the transactional customers. I don't think it needs to be any more complicated than that. And then you have to define that balance. Fine. Have different communication strategies for both of those buckets. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. For startups moving to scale up, it doesn't need to be any more complicated.
Makes sense. Alex, the time flies by, but we're out of time. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
The final question that I normally ask is, what would you say is the one best recommendation that you can offer to a CEO or founder moving from that startup to scale up phase?
I think it is incumbent on a startup founder to scale up founder to remember that no matter what industry you are in, no matter how big your organization is or gets, behind every click, call, or contract is a human being. And now more than ever, we want to be recognized and treated as one. If you keep that in the back of your mind with whatever you do, you're going to be fine.
Makes sense. Very true. Look, Alex, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you at the next session. Bye now.